Dear guests from both sides of the Atlantic and beyond, it is my special honor to welcome you to this virtual event in the context of the 2020 Democratic National Convention. Today's event is organized with the cooperation of the National Democratic Institute, so special thanks to President Derek Mitchell for co-hosting this with us. And what better place and time to discuss the importance of the transatlantic partnership and to think concretely about how to address together the many challenges and the great opportunities facing the European Union and the next US administration and Congress. Now, our virtual setting reminds us that COVID-19 will continue to present unprecedented challenges. And as we stare the post-COVID world in the eye, we must be reminded that throughout history, we have always been stronger together facing international challenges. Our relationship matters. It matters because our economies are so intertwined. We invest in each other and trade with each other more than with anyone else, creating every day millions of secure futures for our citizens. This means that when recently the European Union took unprecedented measures to fund a joint post-COVID recovery and to support each other and our single market throughout the crisis with over $6 trillion, Europe's unity, solidarity, and strength provided a huge boost to the prospects of US economic recovery as well, and vice versa. Our relationship matters because our security is so intertwined. And when we recently decided to invest, to procure, and to deploy more together as EU, to take more responsibility for our own defense and for the security of our neighborhood, we gave unprecedented support to the NATO pillar of the transatlantic partnership as well, and to US security too. Our relationship matters because our histories and our values are so intertwined, because we know it in our veins that our societies and our way of life depend not just on prosperity, not just on security, but also on the freedoms of our citizens, on fighting discrimination and inequality in all their ugly forms, and in standing up for the rule of law and for open societies, both within our countries and around the world. And our relationship matters because our world is so intertwined. Fighting COVID, reversing climate change and achieving sustainable growth, promoting open, free, rules-based and fair trade, pursuing non-proliferation, addressing disinformation and authoritarian narratives. All these are global challenges requiring global solutions through the building of global coalitions. The post-COVID world will thirst for visionary leadership. We have to provide it. If we don't, others will try to. This is a time for us to engage with the world, not to disengage from it. Dear friends, let me say how grateful I am to our speakers today for taking the time to connect with all of us and to discuss all these issues in our two excellent panels. The first one on foreign and security policy, and the second one on EU-US trade and economic partnership. It is my honor to kick off this event by introducing our first segment, a conversation between Madeleine Albright, former US Secretary of State and Chair of NDI, and Karen Donfried, President of the German Marshall Fund. Secretary Albright's far-sighted defense of the transatlantic relationship and a Europe whole and free while serving in the Clinton administration, his subsequent leadership of NDI, and her visionary global commentary have set a very high standard indeed for international public service. I look forward, as always, to her thoughts on the challenges and opportunities before us. And I can think of no better person to take this conversation forward than the moderator of our first panel, my dear friend, the wonderful Karen Donfried, the president of the German Marshall Fund. So, Karen, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lambrinidis, for that terrific set of opening remarks. And I would like to welcome Secretary Albright to the stage as well. Secretary Albright, among your many distinctions, former Secretary of State, acclaimed author, distinguished professor, you also chair the board of the National Democratic Institute, the EU's partner in this event today. And NDI works to support and strengthen democratic institutions worldwide. And that is a goal that we share with our European partners. Ambassador Lambrinidis underscored why this relationship between the EU and the US matters so much. And I would love to hear your sense of why the European Union matters to the United States, and what is it that we can achieve more effectively as the United States by working together with the EU. So over to you, Madam Secretary.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be a part of this. And there are so many things to talk about. We've done a lot of interviews, Karen, and Ambassador Lambrinidis, thank you for the way that you started all this. I do think that it is the most important and natural relationships because we share common values. We have very similar interests that we have to and need to in every way work together. We have gone through a variety of complicated periods where that kind of relationship has not been as operational and unified and really trying to sort out what the issues are that we have to work on together. And so I kind of consider myself the epitome of the transatlantic relationship, having been born in Czechoslovakia and being a naturalized American citizen and understanding the importance of cooperation. And at this particular moment, I think that it is more important than ever because of the issues that are going on in the world, and also because the US-European relationship has been under a lot of stress during the last 3 years. And so I think that we need to look forward about the things that we can do together after January.
Secretary Albright, one area where we've seen the United States work effectively with the European Union was in the wake of Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. Together, we put in place sanctions against Russia because of that behavior. And I'd like to draw you out on the crisis that's unfolding right now in Europe, and that's what's happening in Belarus. I picked up my Financial Times this morning, and the headline is, Putin warns Merkel and Macron not to meddle in Belarus's internal affairs. From where you sit, what is it that we in the United States, together with the EU, should be doing in response to the situation in Belarus?
Well, it is a very serious situation and has had the kind of precedent that we don't want to see, which is what happened, what Russia did in Ukraine. And so I think it is very important to make clear that we stand with the people of Belarus who are out there demonstrating, who want to have free elections and not really support or in any way get involved in the rigged elections that just took place. I think it is an opportunity for the United States and Europe to work together. The Europeans have already talked about sanctions being put in. The U.S. needs to take strong action and needs to warn that we don't want to see what Putin is already kind of suggesting, and that Lukashenko actually called him and asked for help, that they will, quote, help. Maybe we don't want to see it with little green men. We don't want to see the kinds of things that happen in Ukraine, and we have to make that very clear. NDI has been very involved in Belarus, and we now have our offices actually in Lithuania and are trying to sort out what we can do to be helpful. But I think the US-European partnership on this is essential, and it will show that our values are similar, that we don't want Putin undermining democratic movements in Europe and the United States and trying to separate us from our allies. So it is a time for action. Sanctions are a beginning, and perhaps there is a way that we can bring out some kind of reconciliation among the parties that want a new election in Belarus.
Well, certainly appreciate the work NDI is doing there as well. Another place where we are seeing a significant authoritarian challenge is from China, whether that's in Hong Kong, whether it's the treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, whether it's in the technology space and the race for 5G. There are so many sectors where we see this increasing tension in the relationship with China. It seems that Europeans and the EU are taking this challenge from China very seriously as well. And I'd be interested in your thoughts about how we can more effectively meet that challenge together.
Well, I think we need to understand that if we work together, the US and the Europeans, in terms of making clear to the Chinese, first of all, that their human rights record is abominable, clearly with the kinds of things that they have been doing in Hong Kong and with the Uyghurs, but also that we are stronger if we operate together. And I do think that should be the theme of what we're talking about here, is that the US-European relationship is at a time when we need to work together more. As I said, we've had some times where that has not been true. And I picked up my Financial Times, and it was very interesting that Mario Draghi was talking about the fact that this is one of the seminal times in terms of how Europe should behave, the importance of Europe operating together, of using the debt that exists as a good debt to try to really support the younger generation in technology and innovation. And I think we should see it as a time, one of those cliches, every crisis is an opportunity, that this is the most complex time in terms of US-European relations in dealing with each other and also with the outside threat that comes from China. So I do think that we should see this as an action point, and I'm very glad that we're having this kind of a discussion to look at what the things are that need to be done. I have to admit that many Americans don't understand how the European Union works, and we need to know more about what happens in Brussels. We need to see Europe as a whole and not the kind of divisions that we've seen recently between Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe, and that I have argued for a Europe whole and free. That is what we need to do in terms of working together now and admitting that we need to sort out some problems.
And let me just ask you one last overarching question, and it's about the challenge we see now between democracy and authoritarianism. And on the one hand, the story of your life, if you think about the US-European relationship, has been seeing the spread of democracy, prosperity, security across the European continent. How do you evaluate these different forces that are underway today?
Well, I did write a book which was called Fascism, A Warning. And I was very concerned about some of the things that I was seeing around the world and some in Europe, frankly, because fascism is not an ideology. It is a method of gaining power. And it is when a leader decides that he wants to, and it are he's, that basically wants to create or work on the divisions that already exist in society and pit one group against another. And that is the kinds of things that we have seen in terms of what's happened in Hungary, some of what has been happening in Poland, and what we're seeing now in Belarus. And so I think that what has to happen is for us to understand that democracy is not simple. And one of the issues that I'm deeply troubled by at the moment is the US is not giving us a good example of how we should operate. Democracy is not a spectator sport. We have to get people to understand responsibilities as citizens and governments to understand what their responsibilities are to the people, i.e. the social contract. And so I think we are at an essential time in which we can't have terms like illiberal democracy, which is what Viktor Orban talks about. It sounds like an oxymoron, and then allow the Russians to build on that division by, in fact, making it even harder for people to find a unified way to deal with problems that are really there. And I do think that the US and the Europeans are natural partners, and we have to make sure that we have an opportunity to really cherish that partnership and develop it even further.
Secretary Albright, thank you so much for opening this event with us your sharing, your wisdom, your invaluable insights will set the tone for the rest of our conversation. So many, many thanks. And now we are going to transition to the first panel. Thank you. I'm Karen Donfried, and I'm going to be moderating the first panel here at this event on EU-U.S. relations in the post-pandemic world. A welcome to all of you who have joined us. And we have a terrific panel for you today. It includes Chris Van Hollen, a member of the U.S. Senate, Maria Arena, member of the European Parliament, Brendan Boyle, member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and Stavros Lambrinidis, ambassador of the European Union to the United States. I have a brief housekeeping announcement before we jump in. I want to encourage all of you viewers during the discussion to please use the question and answer task button on the right side of your screen to submit questions for the panel. And then I'll take those questions later in the session. And our conversation will last about 50 minutes. So make sure to get your questions in on time. And with that, I want to turn first to Senator Van Hollen. Great to have you joining us. And I know that much of your legislative work with regard to Europe has focused on putting in place sanctions regimes, whether that's on Russia or China in response to the disturbing behavior and actions that they're exhibiting in various parts of the world. And I would like to draw you out on A, how effective you see those sanctions as being, and B, the extent to which cooperation with the EU on those sanctions regimes is important. So Senator Van Hollen, over to you.
Well, it's great to be with you, Dr. Donfried. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
All right, just wanted to make sure. Well, thank you for leading this discussion. I do want to thank the EU and my friend Ambassador Lambrinidis, as well as Secretary Albright and NDI for hosting us today. And it's great to be on with these other panelists. And I think the Ambassador and the Secretary laid out very well all the reasons we need to work more closely together, the United States and the EU, with respect to security issues and economic issues. And I do believe that economic sanctions can be an effective tool or instrument in trying to accomplish our goals. They're, of course, only one tool in the toolbox among many others. And there's no doubt that they can more effectively bring pressure to achieve our goals if we do them in a coordinated and united way. The EU and the United States using our economic leverage. Clearly, you have a multiplier effect if both of these important entities are working together. And, you know, they're blunt instruments, often economic sanctions. But I do believe that when we fashion them, we should try to work together to try to make sure that we're coordinated. I would say that in response to the Russian annexation of Crimea and aggression in eastern Ukraine, we were successful at working together. We obviously didn't reverse the Russian actions there. I don't think anybody believed that would happen, but I think we sent an important signal that further aggression would be met with a high price, and we want to affect the cost-benefit analysis that Putin undertakes when he engages in these actions. I will say another example of effective coordinated action, this time together with some of our adversaries, but with the EU. The P5+1, I believe, was a successful effort, first to bring Iran to the negotiating table and then to achieve an important agreement. That, of course, has been undone by the actions of this administration. But I do think it's another example of how sanctions jointly undertaken can be effective.
A quick follow-up, Senator. In your work, you have been very successful in building bipartisan support for these sanctions. And you mentioned Iran, which of course is a place where there is an important difference between Democrats and Republicans. But when you think about the Senate's approach to Europe and our allies, would you focus more on bipartisan support for this relationship, or would you point to divisions?
I think in Congress, overall, you have found bipartisan support for the U.S.-EU relationship, the U.S.-NATO relationship, and that is reflected, as you indicated, Karen, in legislation. I've worked together with Senator Rubio to introduce the Bipartisan Deter Act, which is designed to make clear up front that if Russia, or any other country for that matter, interferes in our elections, they will be met with certain, immediate, and tough sanctions. And we have stressed in that legislation the importance of trying to reach out to our European partners to fashion similar sanction regimes, because we know that the Russians try to undermine and interfere in European elections as well. So I think that's an area where we really need to move forward. And the idea behind the Deter Act is not just thinking about sanctions as something you impose after the fact, because it's difficult to get countries to reverse their actions through sanctions. I think we need to think more about setting up a coordinated strategy and sanctions regime, signaling that we will take joint action if our adversaries take certain steps. So I think that's important with respect to Russia. I think it's important with respect to China. And I've also introduced, and we passed, and the president signed, initially they were opposed, but ultimately signed sanctions with respect to Hong Kong and sanctions on China. And I was pleased to see the European Union also taking steps in that regard. To the extent that we can coordinate, the stronger and more effective we will be.
Super, thanks so much. And now I would like to bring Maria Arena in, because the sanctions clearly are an important tool that the European Union has in its toolbox as well. We have seen the EU put in place sanctions on the issues that Senator Van Hollen just mentioned. I also have noticed that the EU has proposed sanctions in the case of Belarus. So, Maria Arena, can you share with us how effective a policy tool do you believe sanctions are? And do you think the European Union should also be looking to other instruments in its response to the crisis in Belarus? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you and to have this dialogue with the EU and the United States as a member of the European Parliament, but also as chairwoman of the Human Rights Committee here at the European Parliament. And I find it's really important to have this dialogue between EU and US because, as we have said, we share a lot of values, but we also have common challenges for the future. And so it's really important to have this alliance between US and Europe. When it comes to the sanction mechanism, as the Senator said, the economical sanctions are one tool that we have in Europe, and we use it. We said that we used it when it comes to Crimea against Russia, and we use it in other countries also. But I think it's not the only one, and we have said that we have some new mechanism. We are, for the moment, working at the European level on a new mechanism for sanction and more targeted sanctions, because as you know, it is sometimes difficult to put all a country, a complete country, under sanctions. But sometimes it's easier and more effective to have a more targeted sanction-based mechanism. And I give two examples that we used at the European level and together with US administration during the Obama administration. It was the sanction against the DRC responsible for massive crime in DRC. And we used this list of visa ban the asset freeze for people being criminals in these countries. And it works really well in this country because with these measures, they succeeded in having the transition in DRC. It is not yet totally a democracy, and we need to work on this country. But I think that it is important as a message. If you need to work with Europe and with the United States, you need also to respect these rules. So this kind of sanction is important. The second example that I wanted to give is during the Dodd-Frank Act, this responsibility and transparency for the financial sector, there is in this law, in this rule, something on the conflict minerals. And it is also a way of fighting against corruption and fighting against non-democratic regime, giving the opportunity not to accept that some resources coming from these countries are coming in Europe or going to United States. So these kind of tools are really important. But I think that we have to do more. And for example, there is a discussion for the moment at the UN level concerning the binding treaty for transparency and responsibility for corporates, for businesses. Because we can speak about democracy, we can speak about rule of law, we can speak about human rights, environmental rights, but we need to, these rights are not only the responsibility of the public, we also need to have this responsibility on the businesses. Why need it to respect human rights when you are in the United States or in Europe, and not to do so when you are in China or in Africa? We have a lot of companies, European one or United States, from the United States, being in China, being in Africa, and not respecting human rights. So for us, it's important to have this UN binding treaty and to make this alliance between EU and UN and Europe to have this treaty at a global level. Because it's important to have global rules when you have global value chain. And we are in this world now, and it's important also for democracy to guarantee that workers, environmental and human rights are respected also by businesses. And I think that in this case, we have to share it with the US because we have this value. And in this case, I'm a little bit I'm worried about the situation. For example, in the United States, you have this lawyer, Stephen Dottinger. He was the lawyer of the Chevron situation in Ecuador. He won the case of the Ecuadorian people, but for the moment he is on a house of arrest in the United States just because he wanted to defend the human rights and the environmental rights. So we also have, as European or as US, to protect these whistleblowers, these lawyers, these journalists that defend human rights, because we have to show that we are champions on this. If we are not doing it, the rest of the world is not giving us the respect for this. And so to be respected on human rights, we have to show that we are the champion on human rights respect.
Super. And you put a lot of important issues on the table, and one of them is the importance of the European Union and the United States working together in multilateral institutions. You mentioned in particular the UN. And I'd like to bring Congressman Boyle in here. You recently wrote a compelling piece in the Inquirer called "The US Should Value NATO Now More Than Ever." And I wanted to ask you how you see, or what the opportunities you see for the EU's soft power complementing NATO's hard power. So, Congressman, over to you.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to be with you. I have so much respect for the German Marshall Fund, and then also my friends and colleagues on this panel. I wrote that op-ed that you just referenced in the Sunday Philadelphia Inquirer a couple weeks ago, because I really wanted to make people here in the United States realize that the world in which we've enjoyed for the last 75 years, and candidly probably take for granted its permanency, in my view, is very much on the ballot here in the United States in this election in this November. Now, I won't get into our U.S. domestic politics too much, only to this extent to say that I think we're at a fork in the road here, that these multilateral organizations are coming under tremendous internal domestic threat in the United States. The perception by some, including one extremely prominent person, that these organizations like the European Union were somehow created to take advantage of the United States, or to be hostile to the US. When in fact, with the exception of the EU, all of the others that you can reference, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, NATO, WHO, the United States is not only an active participant, we helped lead the way in their creation. We should be active, vocal proponents of them. And too often, I have to say, I'll indict myself in this. I think too often we have taken them for granted and now suddenly find ourselves surprised that there are those that are attacking them. So I'm quite concerned, actually, about the future of the U.S.-EU relationship and the future of the U.S. involvement in NATO. I'm a member of the I'm a member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, very much a believer in it. Now, as far as the specific question about the way in which the EU and NATO are complementary, I think that is such a wise observation. First, I am a strong proponent, as you can probably tell, and supporter of the European Union. People forget it is the longest lasting peace program and peace project in the history of the continent of Europe. It is in U.S. interests that the EU survive and thrive. I don't have to recite the level of U.S. involvement on European soil in the 20th century. So making sure the European Union is strong and has a vibrant future is very much in U.S. interest. And there are things that the EU can do that NATO cannot do, just like there are things that NATO has the capability, the hard power to do that the European Union cannot. One final point, and I know you didn't specifically ask about it, but I think it's important to reference. So much attention over the last several years has been on the issue of the 2% of a nation's GDP going toward defense in order to be a NATO member. President Trump obviously has been very aggressive on this score and challenging our allies, and I strongly disagree with his approach. But I would point out, in fairness, the 2% issue predates President Trump. The original commitment, of course, was made under a previous administration. But I think that while the 2% issue is legitimate, it obscures a more important issue, and that is the ways in which the different NATO countries are duplicating their efforts. Because as we know, it's not just the money you spend, it's how you spend it. And so even today, all of these decades later, the ways in which certain internal country systems don't work with one another is a real challenge for NATO, and something we spend a great deal of time talking about in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So when we can get beyond this current, what I would call crisis in the US-EU relationship, and we get beyond the pandemic, I hope we can talk about ways that we can work together that are actually smarter and in everyone's interest.
Super. Well, thank you very much, Congressman. And what I'd like to do now is bring in another voice from Congress, and that is Congressman Keating, who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe, Eurasia, Energy, and the Environment. So let's listen to a short video.
The U.S. presidential and congressional elections are upon us, and the stakes have never been higher. We face serious threats, existential threats. The issues surrounding climate change are so great. If we don't act now, so many of these effects will be irreversible. The threats of nuclear proliferation, where Countries are moving forward with advanced missile systems and greater enrichment. And if we don't think these threats are real, all we have to do is look to the threats we're facing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We realize that we can't go it alone. We have to work together to be successful. There's no greater coalition working together that share the same democratic values that we do than our transatlantic partners. We should begin there, take a leadership role, and move us forward. That coalition has taken us through the gravest of times in the past, and it'll move us forward to face these existential threats of the future.
So Congressman Keating has put some additional issues on the table, and Ambassador Lambrinidis, I'd like to bring you in to pick up this theme of climate change. At a time when we all feel threatened by the pandemic, there obviously is another existential threat, which is the climate crisis. And we see that this has been an issue also in Joe Biden's campaign. He does see the climate crisis as a critical issue of foreign and security policy. So Ambassador Lambrinidis, share with us the EU's approach.
Thank you, Karen, very much. Look, Europe has made it very clear that the recovery from COVID is going to be green. We're going to build climate goals into every recovery plan that we have. And we're going to reduce our carbon footprint. We have a goal of carbon neutrality by 2050 that we have all accepted and all agreed to. We will reduce our reliance on plastic. We will embrace the circular economy. This is why we'll do all this, and this is how we'll do all this. So why? First, because climate change is real. It's not a hoax. It's happening. It is existentially dangerous for our planet and for our people, and it has to be addressed. Second why is because the COVID crisis showed us the great costs that inactivity, failing to prepare for a crisis like this could have. And climate change and the cost of climate change, if we don't address them now, will be in the multitudes compared to COVID. A third reason why we're doing this is because we will not, and we do not want to be building the 21st century economy after COVID based on 20th century means. Frankly, investing in carbon polluting technologies is something that is going not just out of fashion, but out of profitability. They will eclipse. And if we throw now money, because it's easier to do so in those technologies than in new technologies, we'll be throwing bad money after bad investments, and eventually the costs will be much higher. The fourth reason why we're doing this is because we see a huge prospect for research, development, innovation, great jobs, new technologies coming out if we invest our money now in climate adaptation and in new energy and in new infrastructures. Finally, the reason we're doing it is because we know as Europeans that moving to carbon neutrality is not killing our growth or our economy. It's actually supporting it. It is our new growth strategy. Just give you one example, Karen. From 1990 to today, carbon emissions in Europe have gone down by 22%, which is higher than what we had committed ourselves for 2020. Our GDP growth in Europe at the same time has gone up 62%. So emissions dramatically down, growth dramatically up. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And keep in mind, this was at a time when economies of scale were not there for many of the energy technologies and others that we have today. So this is why. Now, let me tell you how we plan to do it very quickly. The first thing that we're doing is we are massively investing. We announced that 30% of the $1.2 trillion that we have as our next budget in the EU for the next 7 years is going to be to green investments. We announced that a huge part of the next generation EU recovery fund from COVID is going to go to those. So we're putting our money where our mouth is. The second thing that we're doing is we are focusing on everything, on transport, on agriculture, on buildings, on biodiversity, on new energy technology. So this is holistic. This is going to be an attack from all fronts, and our innovation to bring Europe to the forefronts of energy transition and climate protection is going to be massive. The third how we're going to do it is political will domestically. There's no lying about this. In Europe, as opposed to in the US, climate and has never been a partisan issue. If you look at the last European elections, virtually every citizen from the right to the left in Europe put climate change as one of the top three major asks to the European Union to address and to fix. But COVID has come, and COVID has created new priorities, and people are very concerned about their jobs and about coming out of all this. So we will be focusing specifically on immediate actions for climate that bring real changes on the ground, jobs to local communities. A classic example of that is building transformation for energy transition. You will see this happening in virtually every corner of Europe with massive European investments. The fourth, how we're going to do this, is political will internationally. Climate change, like COVID, is a global threat, and it cannot be addressed just by Europeans, just by Americans, just by anyone else. It has to happen together. The Paris Climate Agreement is the main international forum in which we brought everyone in. And that happened with US leadership and European leadership a few years back. And we have to be able to, we look forward to, we hope for American leadership in Paris again, because virtually everybody has to contribute in this. Multilateralism, when it comes to global challenges, is not a dirty word. And we have to get everyone on board, and we can do it only together. And let me just say, finally, Karen, we are focusing on just transition. So we understand that if you're going to stop investing in coal and start investing in other energies, some people in some communities are going to be very seriously dislocated. You cannot ignore that. Our investment in the European Green Deal will have to be equitable for all, or it will not happen. And we in Europe take that responsibility very seriously. We do not think that the markets will jump in magically and take care of all those people who will be replaced. So we have announced already a multi-billion euro fund that is already being gradually allocated to all these communities who will be affected negatively by our energy transition, because we want everyone on board in this, and we will succeed. And I hope we will do it hand in hand with America again.
Well, that's a great point to pivot to Senator Van Hollen on. I'd be interested in your sense of if you see the response to climate change as something that Americans and Europeans will work on together. But I'm also interested in your speaking to what the climate crisis means for the US relationship with China. Because to Ambassador Lambrinidis' point, we need global cooperation to meet this. We have a debate in the US about whether we should be decoupling from China, whether there's a new Cold War. So both, how do you see US-EU cooperation moving forward on this? And what does it mean in terms of a relationship with China going forward? Senator, please. Can you hear me? I'll call back.
Karen, can I jump in on this until the senator gets on?
Yes, please.
I would just like to say that China has to be on board on fighting climate change. China is right now the number one polluter in the world. In some ways, that's understandable. They're growing real fast. But a big economy such as China has to also take the responsibilities that come with it. And when it has to also help lead, given also its own carbon footprint, then it's supremely important that it does so. And we will be working with China on this, and I hope that we can do so together with the U.S.
Fantastic. And apologies, I was thinking I was the one who lost the connection as opposed to the senator. But Senator Van Hollen, I don't know if you're back on.
Karen, I have breaking news. I don't know if you can hear me, but so Chris is a personal friend, and I just texted him. He just called me to let me know that he lost his connection, and he's attempting to rejoin us momentarily.
Wonderful.
So
I'm sure you can speak to this as well, so please jump in.
Yeah, well, first, Karen, I was struck by the terminology you used, the fact you used the term climate crisis, which I think is a reflection of the real success our youth movement over the last couple of years has had on this issue. I am a part of that, even though in reality I'm actually 15 to 20 years older than a lot of the young activists who are leading that. I think that the possibility, again, depending on what happens in November, the possibility to see vigorous U.S. leadership on this in this area is something that is tangible and quite exciting. The easy no-brainer number one issue would be rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, but I think the issue is so moved here in the U.S. that if that was all the administration did, it would receive an incredible amount of backlash from this new activist movement. Now, specifically to China, look, this is something that those of us in the West are going to have to deal with. Countries that, while we don't think of China in the developing world anymore, countries like China and India and others that still have large parts of their populations that need to develop, they rightfully look at us in the West and say, hey, wait a minute. You guys had about a 1 to 2 century head start. You were contributing to climate change. And now that it's our turn to become economically prosperous, you're attempting to change the rules. So that is a legitimate point that we have to deal with. I think the Paris Climate Accord came up with a pretty creative way of addressing that. But I think, and this is an area, and I'm writing something else specific to this, I think this is an area where the World Bank could provide some real leadership in helping the developing world escape brutal, grinding poverty, but doing so in an environmentally sustainable way. So that's what I am really anxious to work on in the months and years ahead.
Karen, this is Chris Van Hollen. Sorry I lost you there for a moment, but I'm back here. I did hear a lot of Brandon's answer. Could I just add a few points to that?
Of course you can.
All right. Well, sorry about that lost connection, but and I didn't hear the beginning of his response. But of course, we're gathered here as part of the Democratic National Convention, and on the issue of climate change, I hope the United States will rejoin the European Union and others around the world in our determination to address climate change. As you know, Joe Biden and the Democratic platform have a very robust policy agenda when it comes to climate change. And of course, it's something we can only accomplish together on a multilateral basis. And so there are really two things on the ballot, many things on the ballot, but one is our climate change policy, and the other, as Brendan referred to earlier, is our understanding that in order to tackle things from the pandemic to climate change, we do have to work together. On China, I do believe that we, in partnership with the European Union, need to challenge China on a whole range of things, from human rights in Hong Kong to issues of their unfair use of their centralized economy to gain unfair advantages, especially in technology fields. I think the discussion about Huawei is a very important one, and will confront other issues of cutting edge technologies going forward. But when it comes to climate change, we do need to cooperate with China and others around the world. And there are other areas where we can cooperate with China. So, we cannot have it's not just like an on and off switch that we're going to cut off all communications and cooperation with China. That's neither in our interests, nor the interests of China, nor the interests of the world. And so I hope that the United States will be able to distinguish between challenging China in areas where it's in our interest to do so, but cooperating with them in areas of mutual interest as well.
Super. And then Maria Reyna, I want to bring you in as well, because there are these strategic interests we have with China, but there's also a really important human rights agenda. And I want to weave in some of the questions from our audience. And we have one audience member who's asked, how will the Belt and Road Initiative impact American interests in Europe and the future of the democratic world order? And just for our listeners to remind, the Belt and Road Initiative essentially is China coming west, China making big infrastructure investments in Europe. But Maria, if you could speak to the impact of Belt and Road, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I wanted to come back to climate change issue because we have to be coherent on this. We can't achieve our objective of climate change in Europe or in US with a part of our production going to China or to other countries not respecting these objectives. So it is too easy to say that we will do our job, but we are not helping them to do it. And worse than that we are doing is asking them to produce what we are consuming in our country. So we have to be very coherent on this. And for example, we have to reflect together on the unfair competition that some countries are doing on the industry, European one, on US one, because they are not respecting standards or worker standards. So it is why we have to work together to achieve this objective for the Earth, not only for one continent or another. We need to be very coherent on this. And it is exactly the same thing when it comes to human rights. We can't say that we have these workers' rights in Europe or in US, and in the same time to have some companies, European one or United States American one, going to Bangladesh or going to India or going to China, not respecting these human rights and sending these products in US and in Europe. So in this case, we also have to be coherent on this. And my last word would be on the migration issue. If you take the impact of climate change on Africa and on the Sahel region, it is a matter of migration, it is a matter of security. Because if we continue in this way, all this area will be totally a desert, and it will be not possible for these people to live in these countries. So climate change, it is not only a question of economy, it is not only a question of well-being for our citizens, it is also a question of surviving of some countries, but also a question of security. And this security, if you take, for example, Boko Haram in Nigeria, it is a part of climate change. Because in Nigeria, you have a lot of people that can't live in this country anymore because they are just starving. So if we are not working on climate change in a very holistic way, we will have problems, security problem, migration problem, and at the end, we will be in trouble as European or as US. So it is something that we have to take really into account. You asked for this strategy of China. Of course, China, they have an amount of money to invest all over the world. And they have a strategy. We can't blame people having a strategy. I don't like this strategy. I don't like the way China is not respecting human rights. But China has a strategy to invest all over the world to guarantee the access to the resources, to guarantee how to feed Chinese people, to guarantee how to produce in some countries. Do we have a strategy to do something together with another way of doing it, with values, with democratic issues? We have to work on this. And sometimes it seems that Europe and US, they have lost this strategy all over the world. So I think it's important in this kind of convention, in this kind of dialogue, to rebuild something and not to blame them to have a strategy, but to have another one and perhaps a more sustainable one for the world and for the citizen all over the world and not only for us.
Super, thanks so much. We have another question from the audience that I first want to address to Ambassador Lambrinidis, but I'd like to give you each a chance to respond to it quickly. The question is, does the UK's departure from the European Union simplify or complicate US-EU cooperation? So Ambassador, let's start with you. What does the future of the UK outside the EU mean?
Well, the future of UK is something that, of course, now the government and the citizens of the UK will have to navigate. We hope that the UK can remain a huge partner to the United States in the same way that the European Union has been, is, and will be a huge and important partner to the US. There are many challenges that we have to address together. I can tell you for a fact that we as European Union, since the Brexit discussions began, have become much more resilient and much more unified, much stronger together. And that is great news for the United States as well. When I mentioned at the beginning the defense cooperation that we have instituted among our member states, this was much tougher to have when the UK was part of the EU. Now it's there. And that makes us a much more strong and vibrant and reliable partner both to the US, but certainly it makes us as Europeans much more able to take care of our own security. When you look at issues like trade, you will see that the European Union has in place right now free trade agreements with 77 countries around the world. That is spectacularly good news for US companies coming and investing in the European Union. Because, of course, once they do so, the products can leave the EU and can go around the world on the basis of these agreements that the EU has in place. The UK, of course, by leaving the EU, will have to negotiate its own agreements, and it will have to do so in the way that it sees best fit for itself. So I am not concerned one bit about the transatlantic partnership, the EU-US partnership, after the UK has left. I hope, and I still do strongly, that the EU and the UK will be able to reach a negotiated agreement by December, which will avoid a harder type of Brexit. But of course, we are entirely ready as European Union to face even a decision of the UK to leave in a hard way. That's going to be unfortunate, but if that's what it comes to, that's what it comes to. My dedication is to ensure that the US and the EU continue being each other's greatest, strongest, closest partner, and I don't think there's anything in the horizon that threatens that.
Great. Did anyone else want to speak to this issue of the UK outside of the EU and the implications for transatlantic relations?
Karen, if I might, because I've been active on the Brexit issue as it relates to the Good Friday Agreement, let me just say briefly, Brexit is the right of the United Kingdom and its citizens to vote to leave the European Union. I completely respect that. But let's be clear, the biggest beneficiary of Brexit was Vladimir Putin. I think the UK out of the EU is bad for the UK, bad for the EU, and bad for the United States. I also think that it does make life more complicated for all of us. We are much better off, all of us, when we are united in the West. I also, specific to the Good Friday Agreement, we've made clear, a number of us here on Capitol Hill, that while we respected the right of the UK citizens to vote for the UK to remove itself from the European Union, we would not support any breach of the Good Friday Agreement, which we led the creation of and the negotiations for more than 2 decades ago. I, along with about 8 other colleagues, including the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, traveled to London last spring, traveled to Dublin, went to Northern Ireland, and delivered that message in person. So as we now are tasked, and I serve on the House Ways and Means Committee, we're tasked now to come up with and approve a US-UK free trade agreement. We will be looking very carefully to make sure that there are no violations of the Good Friday Agreement. After all, so much European Union money and investments and so much US money and investments and time have gone into that process over the last 25 years. We do not want to see it destroyed and become collateral damage.
Okay, very good. Senator Van Hollen, we actually have a specific question for you, so I'm going to let you get in a quick answer. The question is, what steps should the United States take under a new administration to repair our relationship with the European Union and the United Nations?
Oh my goodness. Well, I do think that question is central to this campaign. Obviously, a lot of the focus is on our domestic situation, but like others on this panel, I believe our security and success is tied ultimately to our strong working relationships with our partners in Europe and to the transatlantic alliance. And I can assure you that one thing that President Biden will do on day one is begin to not just restore and rebuild those alliances, but really strengthen them and put them at the center of U.S. foreign policy, both in terms of recommitment and dedication to NATO and its mission, but also to strengthening the bonds between the United States and the European Union. And I think it's very difficult to have a cooperative strategy when, on one hand, we're asking our European partners to work with us in countering sort of China's economic strategy and their use of their sort of government power to gain unfair advantage in many areas. It's difficult to ask our European partners to coordinate with us on that when at the same time we're slapping tariffs on European goods under things like Section 232 and claiming that our European partners are somehow a national security threat, whether it's European partners or Canada. So the bottom line is the top priority, I believe, of the new administration will be repairing and restoring our alliances around the world, but then sitting down together and developing a strategy for the future, which is what a lot of this conversation has been about, whether it's on climate change or fighting other global challenges and standing up for human rights and really restoring values and principles to American foreign policy.
Well, I think I hear echoes of building back better in that answer, Senator Van Hollen. You all have been a terrific panel, and I want to give a huge thanks to Senator Van Hollen, to Maria Arena, to Congressman Boyle, to Ambassador Lambrinidis. It's just been a fascinating discussion. I've gotten a lot out of it. And we are now going to transition to the next panel, which will be, I want to introduce Wendy Cutler from the Asia Society Policy Institute. She's the vice president there, and she is going to moderate the second panel, which will focus on the transatlantic economy. And as we transition to that panel, we will hear from Representative Costa in a brief video. Thank you all so much.
Hello, I'm Congressman Jim Costa. and I chair the United States delegation to the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue, an organization that meets regularly with members of Congress and the European Parliament. The United States' relationship with Europe is more important today than ever before. Trust me. With a common history and a shared commitment to democratic values and the rule of law, the U.S., the United States, and the European Union make not only ideal partners, but we share a common interest in a rules-based economy that makes the European continent and the United States together accountable for over half the world's economic success. We're the real powerhouse.
Well, thank you, Congressman Costa, and I want to welcome everyone to the second panel of today's program. My name is Wendy Cutler. I'm the Vice President of the Asia Society Policy Institute and a longtime former U.S. trade negotiator. I'm so pleased to moderate the panel today, and we're going to focus on the future of U.S.-EU trade and economic relations, particularly in a post-pandemic world. Before we get into our discussion, I've been asked to just go through a few housekeeping details for those who are just joining us. Attendees can access the agenda and other information on the dashboard to the right of your screen. And we will be taking audience questions. And in order to pose a question, please click on the details section of this panel and then on the Q&A link. That's enough for the housekeeping details. Now let's get to the substance. The U.S.-EU trade and economic and investment relations have really experienced some surprise twists and turns over the past 4 years. This is clearly one of the most important trading relationships in the world, but we haven't seen a lot of success over the past 4 years in either reaching a comprehensive trade and investment agreement or, frankly, even a mini deal. Meanwhile, bilateral irritants ranging from the digital sales tax to the steel and aluminum tariffs that were just referred to in the earlier panel by Senator Van Hollen and aircraft subsidies have really taken center stage in our bilateral trade relationship and have really crowded the agenda. And more broadly, as discussed in the previous panel, the U.S. has retreated from its leadership role in multilateral organizations and just in working and leading other like-minded countries. And in the trade world, this could be no more evident than in the World Trade Organization, where the United States has retreated from a leadership role in many areas. Well, Vice President Biden has promised to change that. And he's made it clear that when approaching these issues, whether on foreign policy or foreign economic policy, he will put priority on working with our allies and other partners to address all of the challenges that we are facing. But aside from the change in tone and style, we'll discuss today how such a shift could play out in concrete terms. We'll also discuss how has COVID and the related global economic slowdown impacted the trade and investment agenda, both globally and bilaterally? Can the US and the EU reset their trade relationship under a Biden administration? Are there areas where the US and EU can work together and lead other countries and bring other like-minded countries on, particularly in areas like China, but also climate change and others? And finally, might a newly elected Democrat be willing to join the EU in its twin transformations of the digital and green economy? As you can see, we have lots of questions to tackle, and I'm so pleased that we could not have a better group of panelists to offer their unique perspectives on many of these issues I've raised. So allow me to briefly introduce them. First, Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis, who was also on the first panel, will join us. He is the EU's ambassador to the United States. And before coming to Washington, he served 7 years as the EU's special representative for human rights, as well as he served as the foreign affairs minister of Greece and a member of the European Parliament. Second, we are so pleased to have Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy with us. She represents Florida's 7th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. She serves on the Ways and Means Committee, which is responsible for trade and tax. And notably, she has not been shy in questioning some of the current administration's trade policies and tactics. Melissa Hughes is with us. She is Secretary and CEO of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, a position she assumed in October 2019. And she's responsible, the way I understand it, we'll discuss more about this, is promoting Wisconsin's exports to the rest of the world and also encouraging foreign direct investment into Wisconsin. And finally, Irla Smith, who is the president of Ornua Foods North America, is joining us. He joined his company in 2011 and recently became the president. Ornua is a firm that not only imports Irish dairy products into the United States, like Kerrygold butter, but his company has also become a major investor in the United States. So we'll be discussing those issues as well. But I'm so pleased that before we get to the panel, we're going to have one more just quick video appearance, and that is by EU Commissioner for Trade, Phil Hogan. Thank you.
Dear friends, here in the European Union, we are tackling the pandemic in the present while putting in place the foundations for a better future. To do this, we are leveraging unprecedented resources in order to support the recovery of our economy and our society. We want to give ourselves the best possible chance to emerge quickly from this crisis and build a smart and sustainable new normal. So we are reaffirming our commitment to tackling the climate crisis. We are strengthening our position in the digital sphere, and we are building new alliances for reforming global rules across a range of areas. Of course, we remain eager to deepen transatlantic cooperation wherever that is possible, because we firmly believe in the European Union that when it comes to truly global challenges, the chances of achieving success in terms of global outcomes are hugely improved if the European Union and the United States are working together. That is why, since I was appointed European Trade Commissioner last year, I have made it my top political priority to refresh transatlantic relations. Our economic partnership is the most significant commercial artery in the world, with trade in goods and services worth over 1.3 trillion euros annually. It is in our strong mutual interest to find common ground on areas like climate, digital, and reform of the World Trade Organization. On our side, we have reached out to Washington with a blueprint for working together to build resilient supply chains for medical goods, to restore an open and fair environment on the global market, and to spearhead joint reform of the multilateral system, as well as action to make concrete progress on the bilateral transatlantic issues. So I am keen, and we are keen to resolve our trade disputes and turn a new page in the long and illustrious history of transatlantic relations. And I want to conclude by once again wishing you a great 2020 convention, and we look forward to hearing your plans for the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And now let's just get right into the questions and answers. And I think Trade Commissioner Hogan has really teed up my first question, which I'll direct to Ambassador Lambrinidis. And that is, Phil Hogan has underscored really the mutual interest the United States and the EU have in working together cooperatively, both on bilateral and regional and global trade issues. My question for you is that how do you assess the current state of US-EU trade relations, And do you think there are strong prospects for really getting this relationship on a better track in the next administration?
Thank you, Wendy. I mean, I assess the relationship as having a much greater potential than I see today. And yes, I do believe that it can take off. And we've been working on this as Europeans for a very long while. There's been a lot of talk in the past few years about the EU-U.S. trade relationship. Who wins, who loses. Fact is, we both win. We do so every day, and we've done so for years. This is not a new thing. This is the biggest trade and investment relationship in the world, the biggest artery for the world economy. The European Union is the biggest investor by far in the United States. The United States is the biggest investor by far in Europe. Over 40% of all U.S. foreign investment, direct investment, goes to Europe. 48 out of 50 U.S. states trade more with Europe than they do with China. 35 U.S. states trade more with Europe than they do with anyone else in the world. Europe is not a closed, unfair market to Americans. Quite the opposite. It is a uniquely open, free market, the biggest free open market in the world, and the U.S. market is so as well. And because we have the chance to invest and to trade with each other, we have created more jobs and more prosperous livings for our citizens than anyone has been able to do for us in any other kind of relationship that we have in trade and investment. These are the facts. And therefore, one wonders, why have we come to the point that we have now, to be given the impression that somehow we are each other's enemy in trade, as opposed to each other's greatest partner? I don't know. But I do know that when we fight, we create headlines, and we work together on things, we create history. And I'm here to create history. And this is what we try to do. This is what Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, is trying to do. This is what Phil Hogan is trying to do. Let me give you a few examples of the future and close this with that. We have been working very hard in the past months and years to be able to find mutually beneficial agreements with our U.S. counterparts and the administration on trade irritants. They do exist. Europeans have some complaints about parts of the U.S. market being closed and being quite protectionist. Americans have complaints about Europeans. Those complaints are a very, very small part of the huge trade and investment relationship flows that we have. They're still there, and we have to address them. And we're ready to do so, and we can do so at any moment, whether it's a bigger deal or a mini deal, as you say. We have been talking to our American friends. A big issue out there that has to be resolved, in our view, immediately is the dispute between Airbus and Boeing. And let me tell you why. Both those big companies, Airbus, a European one, Boeing, an American one, have lost their cases at the World Trade Organization. They were both found to be subsidized in different ways. And instead of sitting down and settling those disputes in a way that mature partners should be doing, we have started imposing tariffs on each other. So the Airbus case came out first, and the U.S. Imposed major tariffs on EU products. And of course, we will have no alternative than to impose our own tariffs on U.S. products when the Boeing case comes out in a month or so. Why are we not sitting down to settle those cases? We have made serious, very open proposals to that effect to the U.S. administration. And frankly, this is geostrategically important as well, because as we are fighting on this issue, having both lost, China is producing wide-body, fully subsidized aircraft that could be flooding the market in a few years' time, and that would be a real national security threat for both the Americans and the Europeans. We should be discussing how to set the standards for Airbus and Boeing and all producers of aircraft in the future, including subsidy standards. And this is my hope that we can achieve very, very quickly. Other hopeful areas of cooperation, speaking of standard as well, Wendy, artificial intelligence will be taking over the world, and somebody will be setting standards for AI as well. Is it going to be human-centric? Is it going to be human rights respecting? Is it going to be transparent? Will we know who's looking at us and why and how we're using the different products that we are? Or is AI going to be used in order to repress people? We see repression today as we speak in Xinjiang in China, for example, where voice recognition and movement recognition and face cameras and all these things are being used to repress people. That is setting standards. Americans and Europeans can, and we are, I'm happy to say, very close to agreeing to a full dialogue on, can discuss technology and trade and technology and economy and where it's going, whether it's 5G or whether it's investment screening or anything else. Now, do we have the political will to do so? The answer is yes. Do we need it? The answer is yes. Trade is difficult, and trade does have political sensitivities. And we showed back in 2018 that we are able to agree with our American counterparts on taking serious moves to address bilateral conflicts, but also on being determined to address issues with the WTO. The world today can become entirely anarchic, and we are not the only elephants in that room. There are major economies out there which are not us, which are not dedicated to free and open trade, which have a huge government footprint in the markets. There are economies that are trying to develop a trade regime, including through the Belt and Road Initiative discussed before, that would be very different than the one that we are trying to impose, respecting values, and that could undermine our interests. We cannot throw away the WTO baby with the bathwater just because we have some disagreements with ways that it has functioned. We have to work together, and we are doing it, Japanese, Americans, Europeans, and increasingly others around the world, to make sure that this reform happens. But we have to make sure the WTO works. We put it together. We made it work. We cannot allow it to die. Let me close with this. Every time that a European or an American exports or puts a good or a service in a container to be exported, in those containers we put our values as well. Because we produce those goods and those services by respecting labor rights, by respecting the environment. We do not pollute the environment to produce cheap goods, by respecting free and open markets and democracy. And increasingly other countries around the world are also including their own values in their own containers. The trade discussion that we should be having, Americans and Europeans, should be based on our joint interests, which have been there for decades, our balanced win-win, but also our joint values. And if we do so, I have no concerns about our citizens, their well-being, and the prosperity and equitability of world development.
Well, thank you. I think you've made a good case for why we should be working together, and all of the issues where US-EU cooperation could really help move things forward in the global trading system in a constructive way. Representative Murphy, maybe I can turn to you now and just ask you, you, as serving on the Ways and Means Committee, you're very aware of, the bilateral irritants with the European Union. Phil Hogan, he mentioned 3 areas where maybe we could work together going forward: digital, medical supply chains, and green trade, climate change, the trade aspects. Do you think, as you look ahead and particularly take into account the impacts of COVID, are these areas that you think present themselves as good areas for cooperation between the US and the EU on the trade front?
I think that we, whether it's those 3 areas that were identified by Mr. Hogan or other areas, we absolutely should be working more with our allies in the EU. I think as I look at the impact of the current health crisis and the economic crisis that we're all going through across the world, I'm concerned, though, that what will get in the way of us being able to work together on some of these issues is that we're going to overlearn some of the lessons from this crisis. And in the U.S., it might undermine our ability to work in a way that helps the U.S. economy recover. So, for example, the the crisis has revealed to Americans the vulnerabilities in our supply chain at a time when we already have quite a few anti-trade forces going on in the U.S. I'm afraid that vulnerability and the efforts to fix that will be a pretext for protectionism across a wider range of issues. As we've already talked about a bit on this panel, is that we're already in the midst of a very protectionist and unilateral trade policy, whether that's the withdrawal from TPP, the imposition of 232 and 301 tariffs, and then the counter tariffs that resulted from that. All of those things have been attacks on our American companies and American consumers, and it's created a significant drag at a time when our economy is already facing significant challenges. And I've always thought that some of those tariffs aren't, especially the ones with China. I mean, I agree with the changes that we're trying to affect out of China's behavior, but I'm concerned that our tariff policies aren't actually changing Chinese behavior. Meanwhile, we're causing quite a bit of harm at home. I think, additionally, the other kind of concern I'm about overlearning a lesson in this crisis is that we have seen how China has mismanaged the pandemic and its lack of transparency and its inability to act as a responsible global actor. And so what is happening is that it is the response to Chinese irresponsibility is causing a backlash in the United States towards China and narrowing a rather complex relationship to a fairly simple one, where it's China good or China bad. And the reality is that there are areas in which we need to work with our allies to check China's behavior. And then there are areas where we need to find common ground and collaborate. And I'm afraid not only that the movement towards securing our supply chains will result in more protectionism, as opposed to a combination of both diversification and domestication. Domestication bringing some of the production back to the U.S., diversification working with our allies to establish other sources of supplies. And then the second piece is an oversimplification of the relationship with China, and all of that going on at a time when we aren't as close with our allies, given some of these frictions that have been laid out. It will make it hard for us to work together to set up the kind of rules-based global trading system that enables us to work closely with our allies and check the behavior of those who are not willing to work as responsible global citizens.
Just a quick follow-up on this issue of supply chains, because I know there are a lot of bills in Congress encouraging onshoring of U.S. production, particularly in the medical sector. What do you think of this idea of trusted or secure supply chains, where we don't look to bring everything home, but we look to trade and to pursue our production of products in conjunction with other trusted partners and allies? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, and I think that's what I mean by the combination of domestication and diversification of our supply chains in order to reduce a single source risk. The domestication part is, making sure that we have sources in America that are producing critical supplies so that we can respond to future crises, but also diversification, working with our allies, trusted countries to also provide some of those supplies. I think we're going to see that tested here as we hopefully soon find a vaccine and have to work together to ensure that we have all of the supplies that are necessary to deliver the vaccine globally. What we've learned in this crisis is that you can't, if the world is sick, inevitably it's going to come into our own borders. So we have to make sure that there's a global distribution of that vaccine if we truly want to get ahead of this pandemic. And so we'll be, I think, not just in development of the supply chain for PPE, but soon here, hopefully, we'll be testing that theory with the development of the supplies that we need for the distribution of the vaccine.
Well, thank you very much. Let me change gears a bit and turn to Melissa Hughes and kind of get a state perspective, the important state of Wisconsin, where I understand Wisconsin exports over $20 billion worth of goods every year all around the world. Canada is probably your largest trading partner, but you also, your companies export to China and other, the EU and other destinations. I think Germany is your fourth largest export destination. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of concern in Wisconsin about trade, and that became apparent during the last presidential election when concerns about globalization and unfair import competition, really came to the surface. So I was wondering if you could share with us how do you reconcile these different types of concerns and priorities, and how are you able to communicate to the folks in Wisconsin that trade is a good thing, it's a positive thing, and as well as foreign direct investment, both resulting in the support of thousands of jobs in Wisconsin?
So thank you. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about Wisconsin and about our important trade partnership with the European Union. And you mentioned some of the key points, but I want to just level set us when we think about Wisconsin as a trading partner with the European Union. When viewed as a single entity, the EU is the second largest export destination for Wisconsin, just before Mexico, and as you said, just behind Canada. In 2019, we did have about $21 billion in exports worldwide. $4 billion of that was to the EU. And what's really critical to think about is that half of those exports from Wisconsin to the European Union consisted of things like industrial machinery, medical and scientific equipment, and electrical machinery. Meanwhile, 40% of the imports coming from the European Union to Wisconsin were in those same categories. So what you really see is an integration of our trade as we see parts coming from Wisconsin and being put into European Union manufacturing, and then the same way. So there's really an integral symbiotic relationship between Wisconsin and the European Union when it comes to trade. And so as I come into my role, you mentioned I started in October. I come from the private sector. And so for me, I'm taking on the role of talking to Wisconsin businesses about how important trade is for their businesses and for the stability of their businesses. Companies that export are typically more resilient. They're better insulated against economic risk. They're innovative and they change rapidly, all of which translates into an ability to pay more wages and for greater opportunities for professional growth for our employees, for our Wisconsinites. So I want to make sure that all Wisconsin businesses have an avenue to participate in global trade and that they're thinking about it. So we do things like teach businesses how to import, how to export, so that they can get a sense of what the global marketplace is. If you think about Wisconsin, we are based very much in the central part of the United States. Besides Canada, anything international is pretty far away. And so for a small business or many of our businesses to consider global trade, it can be overwhelming. And one of the things we do at our economic development agency is make sure that businesses can learn about how to export and how to import. But really what we're seeing right now in the current environment is a lot of uncertainty. Obviously with the pandemic, that creates a lot of uncertainty, but the whole conversation about tariffs and trade is really challenging for businesses. And when you have this instability, you take on a wait and see mindset. You take on a hang on, I'm gonna hold steady here rather than expand into new markets. And this contraction and this failure to take the opportunity of the global marketplace really hurts Wisconsin and it hurts the EU. So, you know, I mentioned that I came from the private sector. When I was in the private sector, I worked for a dairy company. The dairy business is subject to a lot of instability, as I'm sure Mr. Smith would relate to. But so the more that we can plan, the more that we can predict the marketplace, the more we can be proactive. And, you know, in a situation where you have moving tariffs and you have these irritants constantly, it is hard for a business to take on that kind of instability and to explore new markets and to do that. So where we can find stability, where we can move towards an ability to plan and to understand what the marketplace is like, then you can offer the businesses an opportunity to take place and to think about that market. One other thing I'd just like to touch on is, you know, we have iconic companies in Wisconsin that work globally. Many of them are invested in the European Union and consider the European Union as a long-term partner. And their growth overseas and their bringing back that experience to Wisconsin allows us all to grow. One company in particular I'd love to highlight is Manpower Company. Manpower was founded in 1948 here in Milwaukee. They had two attorneys that were the founding folks at Manpower and have grown into a $22 billion company with operations in over 80 countries. And in particular, there are 800 Manpower offices throughout Europe. And I just want to say that, you know, personally, I've been able to work with Manpower and particularly the CEO of Manpower to learn the experience that Manpower has had during the pandemic. Coming from China across Europe and to Wisconsin, we were able to work with these companies and understand the impact on their workforce, on their operations, and that really helped Wisconsin's business community prepare for the pandemic. And so we're really indebted to those companies for their help. And, you know, there are other iconic Wisconsin companies engaged in business in the European Union, including Harley-Davidson and Rockwell International and the Kohler Company. All of these companies have seen the opportunities in the European Union, and we need to extend that opportunity to more and more businesses. We do that often by leading trips to the European Union. We were just there back in February visiting Belgium, meeting at the EU headquarters, and meeting with the Flanders Trade and Invest. Luxembourg and Spain were on our list, you know, and we continue to want to come and visit, but given the current environment, you know, obviously we have to be thinking about the restrictions there, but we're going to be planning virtual trade events with Germany and with other countries in the European Union, again, in an effort to make sure our businesses understand the opportunities and that we can have these relationships and continue to work together.
Well, thank you very much for that. And maybe I can turn to our fourth panelist, Mr. Smith. You're from the private sector and from a dairy company that my understanding is you started exporting to Wisconsin, and you followed that up with actual investing in Wisconsin and hiring, you know, workers there and really developing a presence in the state. So I would hope that you could maybe share with us what led your company to invest in the United States. Why did you find the U.S. to be an attractive destination for investment? And has any of this changed in the past 4 years, given a lot of the ups and downs in our trading relationship?
Thanks, Wendy. Well, to answer that question, first of all, I think I'll just give a quick background on EUintheUS to give us all context. So we're a dairy cooperative owned by a community of about 14,000 Irish farming families. We're Ireland's largest exporter of dairy products, exporting to about 110 countries worldwide, headquartered in Dublin, Ireland, staff about 2,400 people worldwide. And we're the proud owner of the Kerrygold brand, which is Ireland's first ever €1 billion food brand and the most successful food export from Ireland. Here in the USA, we have 3 production facilities, one in Wisconsin, one in Minnesota, one in Illinois. and they manufacture functional cheeses and they sell it to the food ingredient and food service sectors. These facilities buy and use US dairy products for their manufacturing. They employ about 230 people in those 3 states. On the Kerrygold side of the business, our food side of the business here in the USA, we are headquartered out of Evanston, Illinois, and we sell and market Kerrygold butter and cheese nationwide. We employ about 40 people here in Evanston, and then we've got about 20 salespeople dotted all around the USA. And I'm very proud to say that that Kerrygold is the #2 butter in the USA and the #1 specialty cheddar in the USA brand. And like the great news is we're available in about 26,000 stores across the country. So moving from that context, our history, like our evolution in the USA, we started off in the 70s or 80s trading bulk dairy ingredients to the USA, the likes of casein and milk proteins. We then recognized that the USA could be a good market for premium cheese in the retail grocery channel. And the potential of this business and the growing interest in Kerrygold encouraged us to invest in DPI, which is a specialty food distributor. And that could initially help us with market access and retail distribution. And then this ultimately gave us the confidence to broaden our investment outside of the Kerrygold brand and into the wider dairy sector. And so based on our experience, I would say that you need to encourage trading to encourage investment. And what I mean by that is like trading allows you to get more confident in the market, to see the opportunities firsthand. And like if trading is compromised, then that will over time lessen your ability to invest in a market. The factors that drove us to the USA, like Ornua had been exporting these dairy products, well, we have been exporting dairy products for 40, 50 years now. But the USA has always been an attractive market for EU companies to invest in. It's a strong political, stable economy. The culture, the language links, in particular for Ireland and the strong Irish-US relations that are deep-rooted ties, that is a pull, combined with the sheer scale and size of the US market makes it appealing for investment. And for Ornua and our ambitions to be a major international dairy business, we had to be in the US. And I'm proud to say like that in our investing and business here over the last 40 plus years, that today the US is a critically important trading partner for our business. We're committed to this market. We're committed to our customers, our loyal consumers who love the taste of Irish butter and cheese. And we're committed to our team on the ground here. And we've appreciated all of the support that we've received from US departments and agencies and other bodies over the past few decades here in the USA. But then moving on to trade wars and how has that affected our business, or how will that affect our investment decisions? Over time, it will most likely affect our decision making. The good news is we recently announced a 10 million investment in our cheese making facility in Hilbert, Wisconsin, where we employ over 200 people. This expansion will unlock about 30+% extra capacity out of that site and extra jobs up in Wisconsin. But unfortunately, our Kerrygold business has been impacted by these tariffs for sure. So we've heard it from other panelists, like the current aircraft dispute between the US and the EU is out there, and it has nothing to do with the food or dairy sectors. Kerrygold is very much collateral damage in a transatlantic dispute on subsidies on civil aircraft. The further irony is that Airbus is not produced in Ireland, and we are one of the largest purchasers of Boeing aircraft in the world. Yet we're caught up with all of this. So, and at the end of the day, the most impacted so far has unfortunately been American consumers who are faced with having to buy at higher prices the food that they love.
Well, thank you. And I think you raise a good point. Maybe you can just talk about like the effectiveness of the tariff policy over the past 4 years. And is this something we should just put behind us and figure out a better way going forward, given all of the costs to US consumers, US companies, and US workers, not only by the tariffs the US has imposed, but the counter tariffs that our trading partners have imposed on US interests. So maybe Congressman, how do you assess this, this tariff strategy? And do you think it's time to find other tools and other mechanisms to achieve our trade objectives?
As you mentioned in your introduction to me, I have been quite vocal and critical about this administration's use of tariffs and its trade policy. I think tariffs have a role, but they are a tool to get people to the negotiations table, and they are a trading tool. They're not an ends in of itself. And unfortunately, it feels as if this administration has used tariffs as the trading end state. And what that means is that we are hurting American businesses and American workers at a time when they can least afford this additional tax. And I tend to be a bit skeptical when the US or any other country for that matter turns to these types of protectionist measures. In my view, these measures more likely result in self-harm than self-preservation. And I believe that if we have a strong rules-based trading trading system, a WTO that is modernized and that ensures that all of the people involved in the global trading system have recourse when there are unfair trade practices, then these tariffs are not necessary. There should be other remedies. I don't want to sound like I oppose all tariffs. There may be an appropriate and even necessary tool in certain cases, but I do think they are a tool and not an end state. And the other thing is, I would have to say that despite all of the criticisms of the WTO, we shouldn't abandon it altogether. I think there are ways for us to reform it and make sure that we uphold the rules-based global trading system. And I guess my final point will be that when I hear from my constituents, I hear far more about the harm and the damage that they are suffering as a result of a trade policy driven solely by tariffs than I do hear from constituents who feel like those tariffs should remain and that it's somehow beneficial to them. You need to look no further than our agricultural products. We have had to subsidize farmers in the States extensively because of the damage that is being done by the trade policy that is going on. And again, they're suffering at a time when there is they can ill afford to do so. And so I would say, it's well past time that we find a different path forward to ensure that all of our trading partners engage in fair rules-based trading system.
Ambassador Lambrinidis, the imposition by the U.S. of tariffs on steel and aluminum against the European Union really soured our bilateral relationship early on in the administration. If the Biden administration were to say, we're willing to lift these tariffs and try and kind of restart and reset our bilateral relationship, would you, the EU, be willing to work with the United States to figure out a way to get at the problem that these tariffs didn't solve, and that is really Chinese overcapacity in the steel and aluminum sectors, which have had great distortive effects on the markets, on the global markets in these commodities?
Thank you. The answer is absolutely. I've traveled a lot around the United States in my present capacity, and I've spoken to everyone from CEOs of companies to factory workers, and everyone gets it, that tariffs are taxes, that they hurt U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses, and of course they hurt Europeans as well. And they fundamentally hurt the biggest, most positive trade and investment relationship in the world. I can tell you, because we've said this in the past, that not only would we be enthusiastic about the prospect of ending those entirely unjustified so-called national security tariffs against the EU, but we would immediately lift all the counterbalancing measures that we had to impose on US products in response, and that we could be able to focus then constructively and very effectively, I believe, on the real challenges, as you said, a world trading system that can be increasingly distorted by countries like China that seem to think that they can shut their market and massively subsidize the products and still have access to everyone else while denying everyone else fair access to their market. And climate issues and how to be able to produce and trade effectively while ensuring that we protect the environment, that ensure we protect human rights, that we do all those things that are hugely, hugely important. So in my view, the future is supremely bright if we get there. We did hurt trust. If one thing, in my view, was most unfortunate in the past few years, is that we hurt the trust that is so important between partners. You know, relationships, they move at the speed of trust, don't they? And if you violate that trust, if you give the sense to a partner that you think that they are unfair, although the evidence doesn't show it, that you punish them because you think that you can, then there's a tit for tat that gets many, many egos and, frankly, many pocketbooks hurt. That is the worst thing that Americans and Europeans can do. So, as far as I'm concerned, I am supremely hopeful that we can get a lot of that behind us and focus on what our citizens are asking. They want us to use the great power of our two open economies to create more jobs, to create more investment and trade, to be fair at it, and then to turn to the rest of the world and make sure that they give us as many opportunities as we give each other. The European Wine Growers Association came to my office when I first took up duty about a year ago, in the midst of quite negative rhetoric about EU-U.S. trade relations, and was bracing myself. They were going to visit the producers in California, and I asked them, so what are you guys going to be discussing? Are the Californians saying that the Europeans are being unfair or imposing very high tariffs on American wines, or vice versa? And they said, no, none of that. We have very low tariffs on American wines, and Americans have low tariffs on European wines, relatively speaking. We will be discussing how it is that we can best work together, American and European wine producers, to get better access for our products, American and European products, in other markets that are closed around the world. And there I understood, perhaps in the best possible way, was the stake here. Sometimes we don't understand what our consumers and what our producers are asking us to understand. And that is, stop fighting, open up the world markets, create a fair-based, rules-based international trading system, and let us compete and make fair money like we know how to do better than anyone else.
Melissa, maybe I can turn to you and just ask you, I know Wisconsin has really been hit by not only, again, the tariffs the United States has imposed on other countries, but you've also been subject to a lot of counter retaliation, I think, given some political targets by other trading partners. When you talk to the citizens of Wisconsin, how do they feel about tariffs? Do they think that they have been useful in getting other countries to the negotiating table and to open up their markets? Or do they view these tariffs as something that they're paying the cost and not really changing things internationally?
I think that most often Wisconsinites view the tariffs as almost a friendly fire moment where they are caught in the crossfire of the tariffs, and we have experienced a number of unintended consequences of the big trade wars. I can give you an example of a drug company that we have here in Wisconsin that manufactures a critical drug for use all around the world, and because of a glitch in some tariff language, the opportunity has now been opened for most of that, the supplies for that product to be moved to China. And we have a company that is doing well, that's providing global medicine, and yet they're concerned about how their supply chain is going to be impacted by a particular tariff. And frankly, the company is struggling to understand where to go for help, what to do for help. And so this is where I think Wisconsin really feels that they're being caught in the crossfire. And as the ambassador mentioned, you lose a trust in that moment, and you lose the ability to really trust the global market. And so you revert to that contraction. I want to say that I think there's an opportunity, though. I love what the ambassador said about using the great power. There is a opportunity in Wisconsin to work on the green economy, to work on clean water. And if we can find those avenues and work with the European Union on things like that, then Wisconsin can see the opportunity and see the ways to build the economy and rechange our manufacturing base to a future clean climate base. And so I think there's lots of opportunities, as Mr. Smith said, to work through trading, to build that trust, and to reinvigorate all of our economies as we come out of this global pandemic.
We're close. We're almost running out of time, Mr. Smith. I just wanted to ask you the final question related to what other folks have said. I mean, my understanding is your company has actually seen tariffs imposed on some of your exports to the U.S. And I would just be interested, how have tariffs impacted your company? And do you support lifting these tariffs so business, both exports and investment, can flow between the two countries?
I absolutely support anything that can remove these tariffs. Like, the reality is that the US has always had quite protectionist high duties on imports, but that's no different really to the EU. So we're both in this together. It's the imposition of additional tariffs on top of already high duties, which is particularly challenging. Right now, it's not affecting our decision making in terms of investment. We're very excited, like I said, about our expansion of our plant in Wisconsin. But our goal as a business is to grow in America, to grow our current businesses in America and expand out. And if we can expand and invest in the likes of Wisconsin and other states, that will create jobs, that will boost local economies too, which is important to us, being like an Irish family farming co-op. But the thing is, the success and growth of Kerrygold brand in the US has helped fund our investment here in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and other states. Prolonged tariffs that affect this side of our business could hinder our investment ambitions over time. And like I was talking about earlier on about how big America is, the scale of America and the excitement of it, but the fact that America is such a strong economy, a stable economy, like a good political economy, businesses thrive on that certainty, and any undermining of it will not bode well for any investment in the future. So getting us all sitting down together to work on a trade agreement to align will be very favorable, and we would be very excited and encouraged by that.
Well, thank you. And I think you make an excellent point. It's not just the impact of the tariffs themselves, it's the uncertainty that surrounds them and how that affects business decisions going forward. So with that, unfortunately, we're going to have to draw this panel to a close. I have many more questions, and so does the audience, but we've run out of time. I would like to personally thank all of the panelists for sharing your time with us this morning. And I would like then to turn to Ambassador Lambrinidis to close the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much. I'm so grateful for these two panels and for our panelists. Some brilliant conversations. We scratched the surface on many topics. but so much more conversation and discussion to continue then in the next months and years, and I look forward to it. I would love to thank our moderators, Karen and Wendy, for your fantastic job, all the panelists, and the National Democratic Institution for co-hosting this with the European Union delegation in the United States. This relationship in foreign policy, in the economy, in virtually every sphere of life has inspired each other, has inspired the world for decades. I am hopeful that we'll be able to use all the lessons we've learned and are learning, especially in the post-COVID world, to re-inspire others, to work together and to lead in a world that is going to be prosperous and peaceful and clean and healthy. And no one can do this better than Americans and Europeans together. So I wish you all luck with the convention, and I look forward to continuing the conversation very soon. Bye-bye to all.